Don't make this harder than it has to be, Mom. That's what my son said while the transport aide slid my suitcase into the white van. His voice was flat, like he was reading a grocery list, and I was the dented can he couldn't return. I stood on the cracked driveway in my soft-soled shoes and my church coat, the one with the missing button I kept meaning to sew. The air smelled like thawing leaves and gasoline. Somewhere a dog barked to remind the afternoon it belonged to somebody. I didn't cry. I took the button and thread from my pocket and rolled them in my palm like a pebble. My porch, its chipping paint, the hanging fern with last year's nest, shone back at me in the van's side like a watery painting. We already signed everything, he added, as if that were a kindness. Everything. I heard the refrigerator humming behind my front windows, that domestic sea that had held casseroles and birthday sheet cakes and ice packs for bruised knees. They said they booked me a room. They didn't say it was a one-way trip. That was my first quiet thought, a thread I pulled without looking down to see what sweater it would unravel. The aide opened the sliding door. You want a hand, Mom? Her nails were short and clean. She had a scuffed wedding band. I said, I'll manage, and lifted my foot. My knee twinged in that small, unarguable way joints have. On the passenger window, the faint outline of my granddaughter's drawings, hearts and a lopsided sun, still clung like ghosts. She'd pressed her cheek to that glass, whispered secrets to the backyard trees. I wondered what they did with the paper crowns we made from grocery bags. People throw away so many small kingdoms. Mum, my son said again, and this time he avoided my eyes, studying the van's rubber floor as if it were a map out of discomfort. My daughter-in-law stood by the mailbox with her phone, thumbs moving. She wore my scarf. We'll bring the rest of your things once we sort the papers. She smiled the way you smile at the bank teller before you withdraw more than you should. I sat. The belt clicked across my lap. The van smelled faintly of bleach and winter coats. As we pulled away, the fern on the porch lifted in the breeze like a small hand waving. I watched my front door grow smaller, a mouth pursed in disapproval I had never learned not to heed. Here is the part they never knew. While my son spoke about making things easier, I felt a slow, steady door inside me swing on its old hinge. I heard it close. Some doors don't slam. They settle. They simply decide. I stared at my hands. They have my mother's veins, blue roads above the skin. She used to say, "These are maps to everything I have carried." I used to laugh. Now I trace them like roots home that no longer exist on paper, but still live in the body. Kayla, the aide, buckled me in and asked about the radio. I said no. Silence is the only station that still plays the songs I know by heart. The swing set stood empty in the wind. A memory rose. My husband pushing our boy higher, saying, "Kick the sky." Both of them believing for a second the sky could be kicked and would laugh about it. The house slipped behind maples. I pressed my tongue to the place where a molar used to be and felt the unfamiliar hole with a familiar mind. Everything I'd lose from now on would announce itself as absence before it learned to be space. They called it a retirement community, but the hall carpet told the truth, patterned to hide spills, spongy underfoot, the colour of overbrewed tea. My room had a window that faced the parking lot and a tree that shed its bark like old paper. The bedspread was floral in the way of rooms that have had many mothers and none. On the dresser sat a laminated brochure promising bingo, chair yoga, companionship. "You'll like it here," my daughter-in-law said, standing in the doorway without taking off her coat. She kept glancing at the exit sign, as if it were a friend waiting. They have activities, and the nurses can keep an eye on you. Less worry for everyone. Everyone meant them. Less worry is a kind of currency. I had spent mine for years. A nurse with soft shoes and patient eyes showed me a plastic cup with my name in block letters. "For toothbrushes," she said. I nodded. I thought of my bathroom at home, the white ceramic cup with the chip that looked like a tiny bite. I had kept it 38 years. Things that are chipped don't stop holding. They become honest. After they left, after the awkward hug from my son, after "text me if you need anything" from a woman who had muted my number months ago. I sat on the bed and watched a pair of crows argue on the bare branches. The radiator hissed like someone boiling a secret. I laid my hands on my knees and waited for the wanting to scream to settle into the wanting to breathe. That night, in the dining room, I met women who had sewn for grandchildren who no longer visited, men whose wallets contained more appointment cards than dollar bills. A television mounted high insisted on a game show none of us had asked for. The meatloaf came with a gravy the colour of November. "First week's the hardest," the woman across from me said. Her name was Ruth. She wore a cardigan held together with a single safety pin, neat as a spine. "Then it's the second week," she added, and we both smiled at our own bleak humour. The first night I woke to a sound like a spoon left in a sink. It was the woman down the hall, tapping her ring against her bedrail to keep time with whatever she remembered. I lay there and matched my breathing to it. Tap, tap, breathe, until the fear that I was a parcel left on a doorstep dulled into the knowledge that I was a person lying in a bed. People in beds make sounds. Floors carry them kindly or not at all. In the morning, a volunteer came by with a cart of books and board games. "Anything you like?" she asked. I chose a jigsaw puzzle of a lighthouse, the ocean around it cut into blue and bluer. I told myself I'd start with the edge pieces, because borders are the only mercy some pictures allow. When I found the light at the top of the lighthouse, I put it in the middle of the table and left it there, unreasonable as hope and twice as stubborn. Before sleep, I took from my suitcase a small spiral notebook with a blue cover. On the first page, I wrote the date in careful numbers. Then I wrote what I had learned from the day. Never mistake silence for consent. A radiator can sing a person to sleep. The fern survives where it's hung. I tucked the notebook under my pillow, not because I feared someone might take it, but because I wanted my thoughts close enough to warm my ear. The next morning, a social worker with a clipped smile handed me a folder titled Intake. There were forms with boxes, boxes with lines, lines with assumptions. "You've already signed your house over to the family," she said, flipping efficiently. "So we'll just need—" She kept talking. Words like liquidate and streamline bumped into the flowers on my bedspread. "I signed what?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a cereal box. Empty, but still making noise when shaken. She tapped a page. "Durable power of attorney. Very common. Your son brought it yesterday. It simplifies everything." Her nails were pale pink moons. "You initialed here and here." She pushed the paper toward me. My initials did sit there, tidy as crumbs. Funny how a flick of a pen can be used to erase a life. I remembered that day. The kitchen table, a stack of mail, my son saying, "These are just in case, Mum." I'd trusted the comfort of our routine. "Sign here, please. I baked banana bread. Do you want the end piece?" Trust is a porch light left on all night because you believe the neighborhood will protect it. "May I make a copy?" I asked. She hesitated, then fetched one. I folded the pages slowly, crease by crease, the way I had folded my husband's flag after the funeral, with the help of the honor guard. Even paper can be taught to respect triangles. After lunch, I called the number I had copied for the legal aid clinic. A woman answered in a voice that had stored other women's stories carefully, like quilts in cedar. She told me I wasn't alone. She didn't rush me. When I apologized, for what, I'm not sure. We apologize out of reflex, as if we were born leaky. She said, "Take your time." No one had said that to me in a long while. Taking my time felt like taking my name back, one syllable at a time. I also called the church lawyer's last known number. It went to voicemail. He had retired to Arizona, where people go to let their joints pronounce a softer weather. "It's Helen," I said. "The one with the fern." I smiled after I hung up, because I realized I had a way to identify myself that had nothing to do with mother or wife or patient. I was a woman with a plant and a plan. In the afternoon, in the sunroom that smelled faintly of oranges and dust, I borrowed the community computer. I typed with 2 fingers, searching words that tasted like metal: revocation, undue influence, elder financial exploitation. I kept my shoulders down when a recreational aide walked behind me. I was only a grandmother reading the news. When no one looked, I took a photo of that power of attorney with my phone, the one my husband had given me years ago, the one I never thought I would need for anything except pictures of birthdays. Here is the second thing they never knew. I once worked 28 years behind the public library desk, under a sign that said, "Ask me." I knew how to find the thing under the thing. I knew to read footnotes. I knew where to keep a copy that wouldn't get lost. On the 3rd day, my sweater went missing from the laundry cart. It was the grey one with elbow patches I'd sewed myself. I went to the nurse's station and described it. "Clothes wander," a nurse said kindly. "We'll keep an eye out." Wandering is what people say when they mean disappearing. My husband used to wander into the garage for hours after his diagnosis, leaving me to translate bills and pill bottles. My son wandered through jobs and girlfriends, always returning with his hands out and his mouth full of reasons. I'd let so many things wander: boundaries, time, savings. Each small surrender dressed itself as love. At dinner, Ruth said, "You're making a list in that head of yours." I stirred the pale applesauce. "I'm making a quilt," I said, "with all the scraps." She laughed once, like a cough. "Just don't let anyone else pick the pattern." Later, alone, I opened the notebook and drew the floor plan of my old house from memory, labels in tidy print, linen closet with extra soap, cabinet with the good mugs, chipped blue, faded tulips, drawer with birthday candles. Then I drew a small star in the crawl space behind the built-in bookshelf in the den. The secret they didn't know sat there in the dark. A fireproof envelope containing a trust instrument I'd set up after my husband died, when the lawyer at church, retired now, generous with his Sunday afternoons, had helped me understand how paper can protect a woman when people won't. We'd put the house into the Maple Street Trust, with me as trustee and lifetime beneficiary. Any transfer required my signature in front of that lawyer, on a weekday, with a whispered code word we'd picked together and written nowhere. I had picked fern, because it thrives in shade, because it makes its own weather with fronds that gather light and water and turn it into something green. I made tea in the small kitchenette and watched steam cloud the window, turning the parking lot into a softer world, where branches were lace and cars were benign shapes moving through a gentle fog. When the steam cleared, The world went back to its hard lines. I put the tea bag on the saucer and left its little brown circle like a seal on a letter. People notice big stains and miss the rings left by things that once were hot and then weren't. I have been a ring left by a cup on a table many times. I have learned to be the hand that lifts the cup, too. That night, I dreamed of the crawl space behind the bookshelf, of reaching in and touching the envelope. Paper cool as creek stones in August. I woke with the word fern in my throat, as if I might cough up a green frond. I laughed at myself softly in the dark. A woman can be dramatic alone and still be sensible by daylight. The document in the folder at this retirement home, the power of attorney with my tidy initials, would only reach so far as they could stretch it. My hands shook when I remembered giving my son a pen next to a banana bread. Then they steadied when I remembered the word tucked between my ribs, fern. You look settled. My son said it like a question that wanted to be a verdict. He stood in my doorway with a paper cup of coffee and eyes that darted like minnows. My granddaughter peeked around his leg. She wore glitter sneakers and the expression of a child who knows the adults are speaking a language she hasn't been taught. I'm fine, I said, which was not a lie. Fine like a hairline crack that hasn't been tested by winter yet. My daughter-in-law stayed in the hallway, scrolling. We're working on the house, my son said. Had to get a crew in. You know how inspectors are. We'll text you pictures when it's ready to sell. He sipped, burned his mouth, winced. This place is good for you. Structure. Bring me the fern, I said, from the porch. It doesn't like too much sun, so put it by the north window. He blinked. The fern? Yes, I said. It likes shade. It remembers. He shrugged, already forgetting, and promised nothing. When he left, he kissed my forehead the way he had when he was 8 and wanted allowance early. My granddaughter waved, her small hand opening and closing like a sea creature's soft heart. Ruth came by later with a magazine 3 months old. He's a talker, your boy, she said. Talkers make fog. She settled in my chair, breathed as if the fabric had kept stories. What are you going to do? I'm going to stand very still and let the fog blow by, I said. And then I'm going to put on my shoes. She nodded, satisfied. Good, she said. I hate seeing a woman barefoot when the floor's dirty. Ruth told me that when her daughter placed her here, she wrote on the intake forms that Ruth wandered. I don't, Ruth said. I leave one room for another on purpose. We ate pudding the colour of beige. Intent? She said, pinning me with a look that had likely kept many children in line. That's the difference between drifting and sailing. After my son left, I held the paper cup he'd brought and noticed it had a tiny crack. I pressed my thumb over it and felt the warmth blanch my skin. When I let go, the crack widened and a thin line of coffee appeared, like truth showing itself to the least insistent watcher. I set it down and cleaned the ring it left without bitterness. Some marks you erase, others you frame. On Saturday mornings, the facility bus took us to the strip mall, pharmacy, thrift store, diner that smelled like bacon and old coffee filters. I wore my church coat and took the seat by the window. Outside, couples pushed strollers. Inside, we counted exact change into coin purses with zippers that stuck. At the pharmacy, I bought 2 things, a pack of index cards and a tiny lockbox with a combination. At the thrift store, I ran my fingers along the books until I found a legal self-help paperback, outdated but sturdy. The cashier, a girl with purple hair and a nose ring, said, "You like mysteries?" I said. Very much. In the diner, Ruth ordered pancakes and ate them with the precision of a woman counting blessings. I asked for the senior special, eggs over medium. Our waitress called me honey without looking up from her pad. The chrome edge was dinged. I used to grade papers here, I said. Back when I subbed at the middle school. Children think whispering is invisible. It isn't. Ruth smiled at the way I held the cup with both hands. You ever notice, she said, how a chipped mug holds the heat the best? I nodded. It has nothing to prove. When we returned to the facility, a woman in the lobby was working a crossword with a pen. Bold, I said. She winked. I'm old, she said. I've earned ink. In my room, I hid the lockbox inside the hollow of a stack of knit sweaters. I had learned, living with men who only looked for large things, that small safes disguised by softness are the last place anyone bothers to check. That evening, I copied the grocery list my husband had left me once on the back of a bill: milk, bread, paper towels, that jam you like, onto one of the index cards. It made me cry. It made me stop crying. Love often does both in the same minute. I slid the card behind the photograph on my dresser. From then on, each time I brushed my hair, the corner peeked at me as if to say, remember you were once loved thoroughly and could be again, even if the next love is your own steady hand. On the ride back, I slipped the lockbox into my tote. The index cards waited like small blank doors. When we passed the exit for my old neighborhood, I didn't look. Some roads are best respected like graves. You can bring flowers, but you don't build a house there. I started writing letters in the small hours when the radiator sang and the parking lot light poured its square onto my floor. One to my granddaughter. I told her about the fern and how plants listen with their leaves. I told her the names of the birds I'd taught myself from a thrifted guidebook: nuthatch, mourning dove, red-winged blackbird. I told her how her picture is in my wallet, next to a receipt for a snow cone we split 3 summers ago. One letter to my son. I wrote, You used to bring me beetles and ask me to tell you their names. I did not then say, now you bring me papers. I didn't ask for their names because I already knew the word for them is mine. Another letter to my daughter-in-law. I wrote, I hope motherhood is kinder to you than you have been to me. I crossed it out. Too sharp. I wrote instead, I left a pie recipe in the 3rd cookbook on the kitchen shelf, the one with the broken spine. It makes 2 crusts, because it's foolish to bake for one when you can bake for later. I addressed an envelope to my husband, though I knew the dead do not get mail. Dear Arthur, I wrote, today your son tried to tidy me. You would have raised your eyebrows and then squeezed my shoulder in that way you had, that placed a stone inside me, the round kind the sea makes after years of patient rolling. I have learned to place my own stones. I have become my own shore. I also wrote a note to myself. On days when you feel like air inside a balloon that other people bring into rooms to look generous, go outside. Count 3 different birds. If you can't find birds, count the types of clouds. If there are no clouds, find 3 different blues and give them names no one has used before. Call one of them yours. I kept the letters in the lockbox with the combination set to my wedding anniversary. There was room in there for the photo of the power of attorney, for the index cards on which I copied, by hand, phone numbers for legal aid and adult protective services, the elder law clinic at the community college. Writing them helped me memorize them. Paper is a good teacher. It waits until you stop shaking. Ruth noticed the ink on my fingers. You're stitching, she said. With words. I nodded. Every quilt needs binding, I said. Otherwise it frays. Walls in places like this are made of drywall and hopeful thoughts. In the room next to mine, a woman cried at 3 a.m., the way a kettle cries when nobody lifts it. Across the hall, a television told a preacher to sow a seed and reap a blessing. In the lobby at lunchtime, a daughter told her father he couldn't go back to his house because it had stairs, and he said he'd crawl, and she said she couldn't watch that. One afternoon, I passed the administrator's office and heard my name. Her son is keen to fast-track the sale, someone said. He says she wants to stay here permanently. Papers shuffled. We just need a letter on file, another voice replied, and a note from her physician. Families prefer things tidy. I stood very still, as I had promised myself, and let the fog blow by. After supper, I asked the nurse for my medication list. I traced my finger down to the antidepressant my daughter-in-law had pressed me to accept for mood. The dosage had quietly been increased. By whose order? I asked. The nurse frowned at the screen. Your doctor's office approved it, she said. Your son spoke with them. That night I did not sleep. I counted ceiling tiles and stared at the parking lot's hard silver light and thought of the word consent. It looks harmless on paper. In the mouth, it can taste like pennies. I remembered standing in a doctor's office one winter while my husband tried to joke his blood pressure into better behavior. I remembered how men in white coats talked to him even when the symptoms lived inside me. I remembered deciding, quietly, that I would not be erased until I wrote my own name to the edges. In the morning, I asked for an appointment with the facility's social worker. When she arrived, I had my notebook open to a list with little squares to the left of each item. I like a list that lets you make proof of progress with a pencil. I want to discuss my capacity, I said, and my right to revoke a power of attorney executed under undue influence. I also want my prescriptions reviewed. Her eyebrows rose. Lists make people nervous when they didn't write them. I asked the nurse to print my medication list on paper with larger type. Of course, she said, and did. I taped it inside my closet where I could touch it each morning and say, this one yes, this one no, this one only if I decide. Taking pills can be obedience. It can also be consent with a spine. I chose the second. On my way back from the office, a man in a cardigan stopped me and said, Do you think anyone knows I used to be a carpenter? I said, I know now. He smiled, his mouth collapsing tenderly like an old tent. I could make a shelf for that plant, he said, nodding at my empty windowsill. Something that says it matters. I told him I'd like that very much. He measured with his hands, as if memory were a ruler he still trusted. You'd be surprised how much can be done over a cup of coffee in a booth with vinyl cracks covered in clear tape. Ruth introduced me to her niece, a mobile notary who worked out of her car between school drop-offs and soccer practice. The notary brought a leather folder and a stamp that made a sound like a small door closing. She listened more than she spoke. That alone felt like a blessing people usually credit to candles. I produced the copy of the power of attorney, the notes I'd made, the phone held between my palm and the table like a bird, too light for your hand to register until it flies away. I told her about the trust tucked behind the bookshelf and the word fern. I told her I suspected my signature on one page had been copied from another. She looked, slowly, with the patience of a woman who has matched socks in the dark and knows you don't rush that kind of work. We can draft a revocation, she said. And a letter to the physician, requesting all changes to medication be confirmed directly with you. We can also request copies of your medical records under HIPAA. Would you like that? Would I like breath? Would I like my name returned to me, one letter at a time? We filled in forms. She watched me sign, then pressed her stamp into the paper. The sound was soft, a promise, not a gavel. I put the originals into the envelope she gave me, slid it into the lockbox under the table, the waitress refilling our water as if we were just two women lamenting the price of eggs. The notary asked what I wanted to happen if my son protested. I want a record of my voice, I said. I want the paperwork to be a path back to myself if anyone tries to push me off mine. She nodded, took notes in small, neat handwriting. I wondered if all the women who ever wrote neatly did so because being clear on paper was the only way to be indisputable in a room. When she left, the waitress topped off our coffees and said, "My grandma always said, never sign anything hungry. You want a slice of pie?" We shared apple, cinnamon rough on the tongue, crust imperfect in the way that proves a human hand did the work. I watched the notary tuck her stamp away, and it reminded me of putting a sleeping baby into a crib without waking it. All the care, none of the fuss. On the bus back, Ruth squeezed my hand. "You're not the kind who disappears," she said. "You were resting." I nodded. Rest is a rehearsal for strength. It fooled them. It did not fool me. They came with helium balloons and a grocery store cake with too much frosting because sweet is cheap. "We wanted to celebrate how well you're adjusting," my daughter-in-law said. Celebrations can be camouflage. They set the cake on the dresser, right on top of the brochure about preventing falls. The balloons knocked their plastic faces against the ceiling. My son said he'd brought some papers, just to tidy up a few loose ends. He said it lightly, like a man suggesting we split the check. I said, "Let's sit." He spread the papers, and the top one said, "Consent" in bold, and below, "Permanent residency." I let my hand rest on the table, knuckles showing my mother's bones. "I'll need to read," I said, "and have my notary present." He laughed like a boy on a dare. "Mum, come on. It's just a formality." He turned to his wife as if for applause. She took a picture of the balloons for proof of goodness. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. From beneath my folded nightgowns, I drew the lockbox. The combination clicked. I laid the revocation on the table. "This is my formality," I said, "effective immediately." I handed him copies. I also handed him the letter to the physician and the request for records, and a card with the number for the state's Adult Protective Services, which I had written yesterday in my careful hand and tucked in my wallet like a prayer. He stared, mouth slightly open. The balloons bumped one another lightly, as if huddling. "Mom," he said, voice low, "what are you doing?" "Reading," I said, "and remembering." I tapped the notary's stamp. "And revoking." My daughter-in-law's phone made a little sound, a new message arriving to say the world continued to spin for everyone else. "You can't do this," she said, too loud. We all glanced at the door, where a nurse's shadow paused respectfully and then moved along. "I already did," I said softly. "And I am very tired. You're welcome to a slice of cake. It's too sweet for me." That night, I folded the cake napkins into squares and put them in my drawer because I was raised by women who rinsed and reused what didn't need to be thrown away just yet. Waste is another way of saying we don't think tomorrow will come. I have learned it does, especially when you are not ready. I took a small plastic fork and washed it at the sink and let it dry on the towel. I wanted to eat something with it later, and remember this day not as a fight, but as a hinge. Hinge is a good word. It suggests doors that move, not walls that stay. When the balloons finally tired and drooped to eye level, I popped them with the fork. Each tiny bang felt like a round of applause for a performance that had ended on my terms. After the balloons sagged and the cake dried at the edges, I asked the nurse for permission to sign myself out for the afternoon. The sun was a coin behind clouds, bright enough to make you squint, but not warm enough to spend. Ruth met me by the door with her cardigan and a purse that had seen decades of receipts and mints. We walked across the small parking lot to the city bus stop. The schedule on the metal post had been taped over 3 times, the edges lifted like a scab. I counted out the change with the muscle memory of a woman who has counted laundry quarters and church donations, and the number of times her name was said in a conversation she otherwise wasn't in. On the bus, a teenager gave me his seat without making a show of it. The wheels hummed. We passed the old ball field where my husband had coached, back when a summer evening could be measured in innings and gnats. We got off near the library. The brick steps had new railing. Everything ages except the feeling when you enter a room full of spines. Inside, it smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. The reference librarian, new hair, same earnest eyes, recognized me slowly, then all at once. "Mrs. Hale," she said, as if saying it made something right-sized again. I asked to use a study room. We made copies. We notarized what needed notarizing. We used a stapler that bit cleanly. On the way out of the library, a little boy held a picture book upside down and pretended to read to his mother. She listened, as if upside-down reading were the correct way. It made my throat ache with a sweetness so old it almost didn't hurt anymore. I sat on the low brick wall and let the sun warm the top of my hands, which have taken to chilling first. We walked back to the bus stop past the laundromat. In the window, clothes turned in slow motion, like galaxies deciding on their shapes. "You ever notice," Ruth said, "how the clothes cling to each other in there, then fly apart?" I said, "Yes, and they come out cleaner for the turbulence." We watched the rotating drum a minute longer than 2 old women needed to. Then we crossed on the light, deliberately, our hips careful and brave. On our way out, I put my hand on the round of the checkout desk where I'd stood for years. A groove in the wood fit my palm. "You still know the passwords?" Ruth asked. "All the important ones," I said. Outside, the wind lifted the hair at my temples as if checking its work. In the evening, I sat in the sunroom and taught 2 women how to set the timers on their phones. "So it will remind me to take the water pill before Jeopardy," one said, pleased. I nodded. Learning is a porch you carry with you. You can sit on it wherever you end up and watch the street of your day go by. Word travels quickly. "She knows things," people whispered, and someone brought me a bank statement she didn't understand. I showed her the fee circled itself like a snake, renewing each month. We called the number together, and the man on the phone removed it. She cried and pressed her forehead to my knuckles as if they were a relic. It humbled me, the holiness of small victories. My son did not come the next day or the next. He sent a text with an angry sentence that didn't end in a period, just trailed off into white. My daughter-in-law posted a photo of a sunrise and wrote about Grace. The house, I learned through a neighbor who called me at the facility line, was not so easy to work on when the deed sat in a trust with a code word hiding in the ferns. The neighbor watered that plant. "It looks happier than any of us," she said. I closed my eyes and saw the fronds making their own weather, patient in the window I used to clean with vinegar and newspaper until you could mistake it for air. I started a list on the wall in the sunroom, in felt-tip marker under the corkboard, where no one had posted anything since Valentine's Day. Things we can teach each other. Under it, in wobbly but determined handwriting, the residents added items: how to crochet a straight line, where the good raspberries were on the Wednesday fruit cups, how to ask a question twice without sounding rude when the first answer isn't clear. The administrator didn't erase it. Perhaps she had learned that sometimes graffiti is instruction written large, so no one can claim they couldn't find it. At night, I moved the chair near the window and listened to the building breathe. Pipes clicked, doors sighed. Somewhere, a nurse laughed once, relieved something had gone right. I warmed my hands around a mug of sleep tea and imagined the 4 small apartments my old house would become, and the women who would stand at my sink and look out at the maple, and feel for a moment like the world had not forgotten them. The feeling travelled from my hands into the tea. I drank it. In my notebook, I drew a map of the retirement home: sunroom with good light at 4 p.m, bench near the laundry where the breeze found you, vending machine that ate dollar bills unless you smoothed them first. Geography is a kindness we give ourselves when the world gets small. The facility scheduled a care conference. Around the table, administrator with a clipboard, nurse with tired eyes, social worker who now smiled with less clip. On my side, me, Ruth for moral support, the notary, and a volunteer attorney from the clinic who wore sneakers with her suit in defiance of something older than both of us. They asked gentle questions to determine whether I understood where I was and why. I gave them the date and the president and the flavour of the Jell-O from last night. Green. I described the bus route to the library, the first line of my favourite book, the name of my third-grade teacher who wore pearls on a string so long it bounced when she laughed. I did not perform. I remembered my own life in a voice steady enough to hold a glass without spilling. The attorney slid across the table a letter. I declined any change in residency status. I revoked the power previously assigned. I requested all communications come directly to me. I signed. The administrator cleared her throat and said they would note it in my file. Note is such a small word. Sometimes it saves a symphony. Afterward, in the hall, the notary hugged me gently, careful of the bones under my cardigan. "You did beautifully," she said. I thought of all the times I had applauded children for tying their shoes or remembering the state capitals. No one had clapped for me when I learned to breathe again after grief, when I balanced a checkbook at midnight, with my eyes so tired the numbers wavered. I nodded. "I did adequately," I said, and that was enough. The volunteer attorney told me that hearings like ours often happened with no one speaking for the resident. "Most people sign," she said, weary but lit from inside by something I recognized. "Most people are tired." I told her tiredness was not the same as agreement. She smiled. "Put that on the wall in your sunroom," she said. I did. That evening, Ruth and I watched the news until the weather came on. The weatherman smiled his practiced smile and waved at fronts as if shooing stubborn hens. "Tomorrow, son," he promised. We both laughed at the promise in the future tense, and then we believed him, because sometimes an old woman needs to, same as anybody else. Sleep that night arrived like a bus I didn't have to run for. In the vending room, Ruth bought us ginger ale. We sat on plastic chairs and toasted the hum of the machine that kept the sodas cold. "Too adequate," she said. "Too adequate," I answered, smiling. The fizz rose and tickled our noses like a memory you don't mind having. A week later, my son arrived without knocking, because at places like this, you don't knock. You announce yourself to the hallway and hope the echo softens your entrance. He stood there, and for a moment I saw the boy who once asked if the moon followed our car on purpose. Then I saw the man who had tried to make my life a folder labelled tidy. I didn't know, he said. He meant about the trust, about the notary, about me. I didn't think you'd... He trailed off, lost in the white space where the end of that sentence should have been. I let the silence sit with us like a third, wiser person. You wanted what you wanted, I said. You did not want me. He flinched, then nodded as if agreeing with the weather. We needed the money, he whispered. Need is a word that can dress up greed. It borrows its coat and hopes no one checks the sleeves. I kept some things, I said. I let others go. I opened my drawer and took out the letters I had written but not mailed. I gave him the one with his name, unsent but not unread. I can't make you take it, I said. He took it. His hands shook. For a heartbeat, I wanted to hold those hands the way I had when he was feverish and small, and the world couldn't afford to lose him. Then I remembered I could not be mother and bank and ghost simultaneously. He looked around the room, taking inventory of the modest life inside it. Bed with floral spread, chair with Ruth's imprint, window tree peeling its bark like wisdom letting go of pretense. What now? He asked. Now, I said. I go on. I smiled, small, the size of a paperclip. And you learn the difference between asking and taking. He nodded. He didn't say sorry. Sometimes the apology never arrives. Sometimes the absence is the lesson. When my son left, I sat a long time without moving and noticed the way dust lifted in the late afternoon light. It looked like snow if you let your eyes defocus, like confetti if you smiled. I thought of birthdays where I had saved the candles to use again, not because we were poor, but because we were raised not to waste what still had a wick. I took the letter with his name back and slid it under my pillow again. Some delivery takes years. I thought of the carpenter down the hall, how he had promised a shelf. I decided I'd ask him to make two, one for the fern, one for a picture of me alone, smiling, not because someone said smile, but because my mouth felt like soft fruit and wanted to show it. Spring arrived shyly, as if it were checking to see who had survived winter. The bus stop robins tilted their heads like tiny supervisors. I signed myself out again one bright morning, the sun warm enough on my coat to be called kindly. Ruth squeezed my shoulder. Don't forget to come back, she said, and we both laughed at how the word back can point to many places. I took the bus to a small office above a pawn shop. The stairwell smelled like old paper and someone's lunch. The sign on the door said, Community Trust Services. Inside, a woman with grey hair in a bun and a sweater as soft as forgiveness looked up and smiled as if I were exactly the person she'd hoped would walk in. Mrs. Hale, she said, we've been expecting you. We reviewed papers. We used words like retitle and remainder and charitable lead. We spoke of a fund for women who had been made invisible, a small light we could keep burning in the window for those left at airports, on porches, in rooms with plastic cups. My house would not be sold to pad anyone's comfort. It would become 4 apartments women could afford when the world told them they were too much and not enough. I signed. The pen felt solid, right-weighted. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the pawn shop bell jangled, and a man carried out a guitar he couldn't keep for now. Some losses are temporary. Some are a way through. I stopped at the diner and ordered pie. The waitress set down the chipped mug, and it held the coffee like a secret you can finally say aloud. Back at the retirement home, my temporary address, not my final answer, I found the fern on my windowsill. The neighbour had dropped it off, a note tucked in the fronds. It likes this light. I touched the leaf, cool and determined. Fern, I whispered, the word that had been a door code and a promise. It wasn't magic. It was memory that refused to be repotted into someone else's planter. I sat on the bed and opened my notebook to the last page. I wrote, "They sent me away. I went somewhere. I learned the names of my days. I folded what needed folding and left the rest unfolded so it could breathe. My secret was never a pile of money or a hidden ring. It was the patient, ordinary power to say no and to mean it, to choose where my name belongs and who gets to use it." I closed the notebook and slid it under my pillow. The radiator hissed its old lullaby. In the hall, someone laughed. Somewhere outside, a car door closed with the same small sound the notary's stamp makes. Final, but not cruel. I lay back and looked at the ceiling where the late sun made a soft rectangle. It looked like a door. It looked like a window. It looked like exactly enough space for a woman to begin again, quietly, on purpose. The next morning, the carpenter installed the small shelf. It was perfectly level because his hands still remembered. He had sanded the edge so it felt like a word rounded by use. I set the fern on it, then tucked behind the pot the photograph from years ago. Me at the beach, hair blown into a halo by a stubborn Atlantic wind, a paper cup of coffee in my hand, a grin I didn't know I'd earned. "There she is," Ruth said from the doorway. "I wondered where you'd gone." I pinned, beside the shelf, a new index card. On it, I wrote the secret in 12 small words. I am not leaving. I am simply choosing where to arrive next. Then I opened the window a crack. The air smelled like rain thinking about it. I lay down to listen. The radiator kept time. Somewhere, a new woman wheeled down the hall, and her suitcase wheels clicked a rhythm I knew. An old song, perhaps, about how starting over is just a different name for carrying yourself someplace your name can fit.